right, hi everyone. Good afternoon. I think we'll get started. There's quite a few people tuning in on Zoom. Our registration reached capacity at 100, so lots of people online ready to begin. Thank you everyone for being here today for the 6th edition of our Women's Empowerment in Development Lab seminar series. Today's seminar is going to share information on quantitative methodologies for conducting research on women's empowerment. Our panel of experts is going to discuss the practical, ethical, and methodological considerations and challenges they have that they've encountered in the context of conducting quantitative research on women's empowerment in developing country contexts. And we do have a terrific panel here today. Our facilitators, Dr. Franck Grimard from McGill University. We have Carl Asuncion from MEDA and Buba Husseini from here at IDRC, each of whom I will introduce in more detail in turn momentarily. But just a quick note on the format of our seminar and webinar series. We will start with an opening presentation by Franck, our facilitator, which will last about 30 to 40 minutes. Then we'll have an opportunity for some audience Q&A. Those who are participating online, you're welcome to email your questions to me. My email is kathleen.grantham@mcgill.ca. I'll be checking my email throughout the seminar just to make sure to give you all a chance to participate, to share your questions and your thoughts. After the Q&A, we'll have a break for about 5 minutes. We'll then move on to the panel discussion portion of the seminar and the webinar, which will last for about 45 minutes, and then the remaining time we'll use again for audience Q&A. So it is my pleasure then to introduce our facilitator for today, Dr. Franck Grimard. He is an associate professor at the Department of Economics at McGill University. He's been teaching economic development at the BA, Master's, and PhD levels for the last 25 years. His work on economic development has been published in the Journal of Development Economics, World Development, Economic Development and Cultural Change, the Review of Development Economics, and Ecological Economics. Professor Grimard is also the president of the Canadian Development Economic Study Group. Please help me in welcoming our facilitator, Dr. Franck Grimard. Make sure to turn on your mic.
All right, so thank you very much, Kate. It's great to be here today at the IDRC, not only to talk about quantitative methods to study women's empowerment, but also to have a panel with people from the field, Carl from MEDA, and Buba from IDRC, who not from the field, but half the field, half policy, and trying to do it so we can discuss these things and try to do it. So what I'm trying to do today is give you a presentation on, is really an overview of things. And so I'm going to talk about quantitatively measuring women empowerment, or about the methods, not so much about the types of objectives and so on, and you'll see what I mean by that. I'll talk about something called impact evaluation. And I'll explain what impact evaluation means, what the principles they are, and this, for those of you who don't know, this is in fact so-called finding a counterfactual. I'll give you some examples from Progressa. I'll spend some time discussing on what probably is the most obvious or well-known of these methods. It's called RCT, for randomized controlled trial. We'll have a discussion of the issues surrounding that, but what it is, what it is not, when it's good to do it, and when it's not good to do it. All right, I'm trying to do it. And I'd like to also try to do it. I'd like to do the parallel with the different sessions that we've had here so far. This is the 6th lecture. We've had great sessions on defining what women empowerment was. We had sessions on social norms, on also qualitative methods, and all of these will be related with that part. All right, so we'll try to see it. I'll go fast. In 40 minutes, you cannot do a lot. So for all that I can do is, and everything else is, the material will not cover. There are appendices and that will be available. So that you'll see this. There also have some examples of some stories about what we do. And if you ever get bored, go to my web links, and there are actually interesting links on the recent Nobel Prize in Economics about why Kremer, Duflo, and Banerjee got the Nobel Prize. The people that are for that and the people who are madly against it, and some neutral ways that are in there, so you can have a look at that, as well as overall things on what RCTs are, but also more impact evaluations. We try to do it. All right. So the material I'm going to show you today is part of this book that's available on the web, part of the Evil Empire of the World Bank. All right, so this is material in terms of, it's a great book that has great examples in terms of that. So everything I'm saying today can be referenced or can be actually part of that in terms of this. So impact evaluation for economists is now a given word, but for people from the outside economics, usually impact evaluation is kind of a interesting term, right? Because they're more likely to know monitoring and evaluation. So impact evaluation is not monitoring and it's not evaluation. So what is monitoring? Monitoring is a continuous process of analyzing information about projects you're doing. So how well you want to do, how well it's doing, how well it's working, you get data almost continuously and so on. Then there's evaluation, which is, determine whether the project did and fulfill the requirements. That's what you do, all right? So if you, for instance, you are a project officer at Global Affairs Canada, you've been supervising a project, eventually it'll be an evaluation of that project, all right, in terms of this. And then the answer is, the question will be, was the project done properly? And are the taxpayers of Canada, should they be happy with that project? That's evaluation. Impact evaluation is different. It's not that. It's an assessment of the causal effect of a project, all right, of a program or a policy on the beneficiaries, all right? And the main difference between evaluations and impact evaluation is that impact evaluation uses a counterfactual. And why do we want to use a counterfactual? Because we want to estimate what the state of the beneficiaries would be in the absence of the program. All right, and we want to compare what happens to the treatment groups compared to a control group. All right, so, and if we want to do this, then we'll be able to look at whether the quote unquote, the program, the project, or the policy made a difference. Right, so that's what impact evaluation, the aim of impact evaluation I'm trying to do. Should you do impact evaluation on all the projects, all the program, all the policy? Of course, the answer is not. And if you're doing this, I have a few PhD students I should introduce you so that they'll have a lot of thesis to write. All right, so when should you do impact evaluations? Well, you should do impact evaluation if the project itself is innovative. You want to learn something out of this. If you think the project should be replicable or scalable, right? Should it be, should the project bring a substantial policy impact? Will we know something about how we want to do this, all right? So if you want to do that, then you should think about doing impact evaluation. So you want to use impact evaluation to test alternatives or improve programs in trying to do it, right? So you get program with credit, with teaching several capacity in terms of, for instance, health or business enterprises and so on and so forth. So you can compare the outcomes of the various ones and trying to do it. So impact evaluation is nicely suited for that. So let's go with the principles that are involved in this and trying to do it, right? So we want to estimate the causal impact of intervention. I'm going to call it P on an outcome Y, right? So P is a program, a treatment, and Y is a measure of success, right? So for instance, what's the effect of a cash transfer program P on household consumption Y? We could do the same thing for empowerment, right? Empowerment, we have lots of measures. Those of you, some of you were here when Sonia gave her talk about all the different ways of measuring empowerment, whether you go with the goal agency, resources or achievements and so on and so forth, all of that. But let's assume now the measure I'm going to use is consumption. Right? It's not a measure of women empowerment, but it's right now. Let's just use this for the benefit of the consumption. So, right. So I want to measure that. So the causal inference is what's the impact of the program on the outcome. So here's my math. Right. So little high school math here. So I want to know alpha. Alpha is the outcome given that you have the program, P equals 1, minus the outcome given that you did not have the program, P equals 0. All right, so it's, and of course, we're going to remove our math version here, just to remember, it's going to see some of that too. So the problem is that we observe the outcome given that individuals of the program. So we observe the left-hand side, or the left side of that right-hand side of the equation. All right, so we do observe the household consumption with the cash transfer, but we do not observe what that household consumption would be without the cash transfer. Right, that's the problem. So solution, what do we do? Well, we have to estimate what would have happened to Y, to the consumption, in the absence of the program. So that's the counterfactual. That's the counterfactual. And the key to a good impact evaluation is a valid counterfactual. So I'll discuss RCT, but there are other methods, the regression discontinuity design, some experimental difference and differences, and so on and so forth. We're all trying in these measures to try to give a counterfactual. Now the question whether it's valid or not, it's the important one. So here's what we want to do. We want to estimate the impact of P on Y. So the consumption given that you have the program minus the consumption given that you did not have the program. So that's going to be the impact, outcome with treatment, minus the counterfactual. All right, and that's what we're going to try to do. All right. So example, what's the impact of giving Maria some money on her consumption of candies? This is high level math. Right, so here's Maria, and what do I need? I need a clone. I need to give her some money, right? Then I need her clone, and X is nothing, right? I'm not giving her money. And if Maria with the money gets to have 6 candies, but her clone gets 4 candies without the money, what's the impact of giving Maria the money? High math. 6 minus 4 equals 2 candies. It's not 6, it's 6 minus 4. All right. So in reality, what we do, we use statistics. We use a sample of different Marias, but they mostly look alike except for some characteristics. And we have here some Marias with the money, that the treatment group. And then we get a comparison group, a control group. And we don't give them the amount of money. And we measure that on average, there's 6 candies being consumed by the treated. And the control, 4, so 6 minus 4 equals 2 candies, right? So impact evaluation methods, finding the counterfactual, are going to be, all right, how do we know the comparison group? This is where we're going to go with that. So we need to find clones for the Maria. Who are our clones for the Marias in our program? These should be people with individual identical characteristics. They all should look alike, all right? And they should also look alike, should be roughly the same, except for the benefits from the intervention. If that's true, then we can attribute the intervention to the differences in the possible outcomes I'm trying to do. In practice, how do we find that? And I'll show you some examples. And we use program eligibility, assignment rules to construct the valid counterfactuals. Right, this is where we're going to go with that. If we don't do this well, we're going to have a bad counterfactuals, and it's going to be garbage in, garbage out, right? So there's a toolbox methods trying to do. I'm going to spend some time on the randomization, and the appendix deals with the others and trying to do it. So I want to show you an example of this. One of the great show of the conditional cash transfer program initially was Progressa as a pilot project before Opportunitatis. So it started in 1997, 5 million beneficiaries by 2004. It was a cash transfer program, which was based on an asset-based type of information. That is, poor people would get the program, non-poor people would not get it. And so you had the choice, the program was offered to you. If you took it, you enrolled in it. If you did not take it, you did not enroll, even though you could have been eligible, or you were not eligible. So there are types of this. I'm going to try to do it. So I'm going to use this as an example. So this was not a small project. It was a pilot project with 24,000 households, 506 communities, baseline 1997 with a follow-up in 1998. So the question here, the outcome of interest, my Y, will be the consumption per capita. And I'll ask the question, what's the effect of Progressa on the consumption per capita? And as an example, we'll say, look, if I were to find in my project that the increase in consumption is for more than $20, then the policymaker says, we will scale up the project nationally. If you find less than 20, forget about it. If you find more than 20, we'll scale up. All right, so how do we find counterfactuals? Now, let's quickly go over false counterfactuals. You could use before and after, or you could use enrolled versus non-enrolled. Eligibility enrollment is what happens when I said you were eligible for the program if you were a poor person. If you're non-poor, you didn't get it. But eligible for the program means you decided to enroll in it, but you could also say, no, I don't want to enroll. So that's why I have individuals that are, my green ones are my Marias that are non-poor, so they will not get the program. But I have some, the Marias, my blue ones will decide to enroll in the program, but the purple one decided, even though they were poor, decided not to enroll. So I have potentially comparison groups, right? Trying to do it. So before and after, what's the issue? All right, these are my candies. So go back to my candies. That's the impact at time 0. I measure someone has 2 candies. At time t1, someone has eating 6 candies. You think the impact then would be A minus B, 4, right? But that's the same person I follow time 0, time t1. What's the problem? Is that, well, no, maybe at time c, that person did not eat 2, but had 4, right? So before and after might not be the right ones, and I'll show you that again. So using the Progressa example, let's go through this, right? When they started beginning, it's $233 per capita in 1997. In second year in 1998, the average consumption is 268. So before and after, look at the difference. After minus before is $35. Right, that's what we see here from the data that was shown. All right, what's the problem? Let's go through all of this and you'll see. All right, well, the problem is that before and after does not control for time varying factor. All right, if in 1998 things have improved in a macroeconomic way, for instance, between 1997 and 1998, maybe, all right, the consumption is at C, so that the real result is A minus C, not A minus B. So A minus C then would be, whoops, sorry, would be the overall real, but A minus B would be an overestimate. But if the truth is that, in fact, 1998 is a recession compared to 1997, so that the consumption, in fact, is down, all right, in the absence of the program, so A minus D is then very the truth. So A minus B becomes an underestimate. So before and after does not deal with time varying factor that may cause the reason why the outcome is changed. Enroll versus enroll is the same way. People enrolled into a program because they decided to enroll. People who don't enroll is because they choose not to participate. All right, they're apples and oranges. Right? That's what it is. Compare. So they're not a good comparison group in terms of that. So just to give you an idea, enroll versus non-enroll in the Progressa data. So the outcome with the treatment had 268. The counterfactual, if you use the non-enrolled after the program, was 290. So if you use the non-enrolled as a comparison, right, that would say that the effect of Progressa is minus 22. Right? It actually lowered. Right, so obviously, you know, the question is that true or not in terms of this? Is the counterfactual valid or not? Here in this case, I'll argue it was not. All right, so before and after the amount of money, the outcome was $35. Enrolled and versus not enrolled was minus 22. So the problem is both are wrong because one does not correct for time varying factor and the other one does not correct for self-selection. So this repeats what I'm saying here in terms of that. So what can we do? And this is where the randomized controlled trial comes in. So let me just go. We can take a population of individuals. All right, you can see here from the map. There are people that are eligible to the program. There are the blue and the purple. And the green are the non-eligible. I take an evaluation sample of this. So a smaller sample, I get to there, right? And then what do? I create a program, and if I use a randomized controlled trial, which will randomly select my sample into those that are treated and those that are not treated, right? And then those that are treated, they'll get the cash treatment. And there will be people that will not get the cash that will be my comparison. And I will look at the differences in the outcomes of the two groups in order to figure out whether the program does anything or not. All right. So if I've done it right, let me go over to the terms here, right? If I've done this thing right, that is that I totally randomized well, my comparison is good, that's called internal validity, right? This means that the procedures that I've taken were correct, right? The differences in outcome is most likely attributed to the program itself, not to different things. Now, if it's internal valid, there's still the question of whether it's externally valid. And what does it mean to be externally valid? It means that my experience that I've done with my evaluation sample can draw lessons for the whole population. What's externally valid means? If I do something in one village, if I were to scale up in the whole country, will that experience of that village be the same for the country? Right? That's the external validity. It's both replicable and scalable, if that's true. Right? Now, the question, these are question marks. Is it, whatever I do, is it going to be internally valid? And then will it lead to external validity? When you do RCTs, you try to randomize, play dice at the lowest possible level, whether it's at the household level, at the village level, or the district. But you're going to have the issues that, you know, if you remember my pictures, I need sample to be quite large. I need numbers. I cannot do this with 3 or 4 households. I cannot do it with 2 or 3 villages. I need several villages. I need several households, lots of villages as well, and everything else. All right, and I need to worry about contamination. I need to worry about cost. This is costly to do. Right, this is not a cheap thing you can do on the fly. Right, and that's why this should not be done on any project. All right, so RCTs for Progressa, 506 communities. So they're randomized at the level of villages. Some villages got the program, and there were 186 of them that were comparison communities. All right, and what it is that they allowed to look at the time frame, and they delayed the introduction of the program for the controlled ones. Let me just show you. So the 320 communities in the beginning got the program. So the households in these programs got them. All right. The comparison communities, the 186 comparison communities at the beginning, did not get the program. But over periods of months, they did not get it. And then at T1, they got the money. Right? So they were delayed the introduction of the program. And what happens at T1, then we resample again, and we look at the outcomes of both the households in the treatment communities and the households in the comparison communities, and we look. If there's a difference in the outcome, we'll then say, well, the difference is because of the cash. Right? So that's how this works. So the randomized assignments is how it worked. It is when we use the randomized treatment as a proper, as a group for which we use counterfactuals, we find here the information at time T0, at time T1, and the impact. All right. And so what that table says is that the comparison looking at the counterfactuals in a treatment group. So at time T1, the average consumption is 268.75. The counterfactual at time T1 is 239. The difference between the two is $29. Right? So that $29, right, was then thought, evaluated, and it was then looking at whether this was internally valid or not. And they thought, well, we think that it's probably a good comparison because of what? Here, the hint from the table is that at time T0, if you look at the average level of consumption between the two groups, they're roughly the same. So experts, people from the field and so on, then thought that that looks like a valid counterfactuals, and it gave an answer of 29. All right, so you have three cases I showed you before and after, enrolled and non-enrolled, and the one with randomized assignment. In one case, you have $35 and improve in consumption. The other one you had minus 22, and the other one is 29.7. And people in Mexico thought that case number 3 was probably valid. Right, and their statistical test then to try to show it all of these things and trying to do it. So that's what the randomized controlled trial is done, all right? And but the point that we have to do is we need a lot of observations. You cannot do this on like a couple of 200 households. We need to do this at quite a large scale. We need to identify the perfect clone. We need to do the randomization. This is feasible only, or most likely to be feasible, when you do prospective evaluations, when you have oversubscription of excess demand, so that you can delay the treatment and you can use that, all right? And that's true for most pilots of new programs that you're trying to do. But if you want to do this, you need to set it up in advance, right? And you need the people who finance your project as a pilot project to tell you that you have the money to do this. They don't tell you after you've done the pilot, right? So there has to be, so someone, whether it's a philanthropist foundation or whether it's a government or something, you have to say, well, let's do this, and here's the money, because it's costly to do. All right. So RCT, sorry, and women's empowerment. Well, there are some examples. For instance, I was very fortunate to be associated with two programs: access to daycare and women's empowerment, as part of the GROW program. Also, the cash transfer and women's empowerment in Tanzania, which use the structure of randomized controlled trial trying to do it. So IDRC has been involved in financing some of these projects and trying to do it. And there's some of that on our website in terms of both the IDRC website as well as the WED Lab. We have some examples of trying to show you how to do these things in the appendices and in the references. You can click and then try to find that and try to do it, right? So, but as I'm pointing out now, is that life is not always a randomized controlled trial. There are lots of reasons why this is not happen, right? So the first thing to point out is that impact evaluation estimates whether there's an effect, right? Is there a difference? It doesn't say why there is a difference, all right? So why is there a difference? That's not what the quantitative evaluation does. The why part is the qualitative assessment, right? We had a seminar on qualitative assessment. That's the type of thing you want to do. The paper I referred to in my references, the Glenister paper, right, on women empowerment and impact evaluation, basically says, look, just don't do quantitative assessment. Do a qualitative assessment instead. Have a theory of change, trying to do all of these and try to do it together, right? So it has to be part of a quote unquote package it's trying to do, right? Now, there's also ethical issues that are important. You're withdrawing treatment of a population for, say, a year and a half, or 2 years. There are ethical issues with that. Right. So is the weight worth, or do you want to worry about this? Right. So you have to worry about this, right? It's costly. You got to do it. It's not cheap to do this well. You need a lot of households. You need a structure. You need to have trained people. Some of you in organizations may not have the staff like to do it. So that's a very difficult thing to try to do it. So furthermore, not everything lends itself to an impact evaluations or randomization, right? If you want to look at the impact of minimum wage policies in Canada, you're not a lot of randomization to do, right? So you don't randomly, I mean, some of our governments sometimes act randomly, I agree, right? But even so, we only have 10 provinces, right? So it is very difficult to randomize on some of these macro types of policy, right? Foreign aid for a given country, does foreign aid help a country to grow? You cannot do an RCT on this. At a macro level, it's not like this will not work. You can look at maybe some particular projects, for instance, agricultural extension projects, whether they work or not with something. You could that, but foreign aid at a macro level, forget about it. Trade policies as well, right? So some questions on that, right? So there are other methods. But they're not without problems either. And there's the appendix 1. I want to show you one method that I've done, that my co-author and I have done, Mahinda Vijayasiri, all right? Trying to get at that proper counterfactual and how to do it. And this is a program, something we did together, but mostly him, because he was a postdoc, all right? And I'll explain to you what the postdoc here means, because you don't have a lot of funds. How can you do these things? I'm trying to do it, and you'll see we've been able to do some analysis, but not a full RCT. All right, in analysis of microfinance and women's empowerment in Nepal. All right, so there's this microcredit company, Nerd and Utan Bank Limited, Nubble, trying to do it. And we worked in collaboration with them, with Nubble, and we use a quasi-experimental design approach, right? So this is a meeting that these groups of women would have on microcredit, trying to do it. So Mahinda was with them, all right? And the ability to get a treated versus control was done after the fact using this method, right? It's going to be a difference in difference, but using a quasi-experiment approach, where we're going to say, all right, we talked to Nubble, and we talked with them and said, so where have you been in Nepal? Where are you operating, all right? And there's a treatment group where you say, we know some of the villages, they have been there for about 5 years. And we also had a list from them of villages that they had identified where they would go. They actually not only would go, but they've set up already the self-groups of these women, but they haven't started the actual thing, right? So everyone is set, so we'll start next year. There've been discussions of that, all right? So they're, as I say here, they've been organized in groups, but yet no money has been disturbed to them. So the treatment group will be these women from the villages where the program has been in operation 5 years. And the control group, quasi-experimentally, will be these women who have been chosen by Nubble to eventually receive the program, but they haven't yet to receive. Right, so for those of you who know Nepal, so the right-hand side is what Nepal, that in the boxes is this area here in that district, all right? And we ended up with our green spots that are the treatment villages, are my red spots are my control villages. So we visited then households in both types of villages, and roughly we have about 320 women, split 180 into treated and 128 into the control. Right? Our results show that financial empowerment appears to work. Right? So with respect to indicators, these women seem to have more control of, so comparing the treated to the control, all right? So these women appear to have more financial empowerment, that is control of income, independent savings, asset purchases, and everything else. However, in terms of the other outcomes, the social empowerment outcomes, it doesn't seem that their outcomes are different than the control households or the control women, right? So it's not to say that the credit programs did not help these women, but it did not help more than the control household. Right? That's what this says. In some indices it worked, some indices not. So then the question is, how valid are these results? Right? Are they internally valid? Right? Is the comparison the good ones? And I'll tell you that maybe they are, maybe they're not. All right? But I only have 300 of these women. If I had 1,500 of these, that would have been much better. I had more variations and so on, right? I didn't have that. Why is that? It costs money to try to do these things, right? So he was doing his postdoc, he was doing all of this. Is it externally valid? Is this sample of women from Nubble, is it the same thing that this represents all women in Nepal? And of course the answer is no, right? This works well for these women that were predetermined by that company, microfinance, to actually do it, right? But would I go to the government of Canada and say, oh, if you do this, this will happen to all the women in Nepal? That would be my comment about externally valid. And, you know, I would hope someone from the government of Canada would say, are you out of your mind? Your results are not perfectly correct, right? So that's where you have to try to do it. And is it scalable is the question. So it is a good study. It's limited, not expensive, but it doesn't do as much as, say, this progressive thing that I just showed you. All right? So there's limited trade-off. Now, as I said before, impact evaluation is a very useful thing to do, but not everyone does it, right? And you don't have to do it on everything. We learned two discussions ago. For instance, Oxfam has a nice methodology, both qualitative, rapid care analysis, and also and quantitative household care survey. They're doing on the fields, and they're trying to do it to try to analyze, to monitor, and evaluate what they're going to do. right? Even Oxfam does some impact evaluation, right? Trying to do it. Not on all of these programs, they're trying to do it. CARE does evaluation and sometimes even impact evaluation. A program that I know well is Power Africa in 4 different countries of Africa, looking at microfinance and empowerment of women, right? And they're trying to do a combination of everything. So it's been done before, but it's a large program. And the specifics of the CARE Power Africa was that the funder, the MasterCard Foundation, was really interested in figuring out whether it would work again. All right, and now the lessons learned. So they set up everything in terms of an impact evaluation. 60 Million Girls, the NGO from Montreal, right, also is doing a lot of interesting work, and they're increasingly willing to do some impact evaluation. But impact evaluation is not for everyone, right? And impact evaluation is not for everyone, both of the NGOs and so the methods, just to go back what it is that there's going to be several methods of trying to do it. If you want to do impact evaluations, just want to recap on one of these things that I do is that you need to think about what type of evaluations you're doing, the rules, criteria, how you're going to roll out, the amount of money you're going to do, and excess demand. If the answer to these questions here is yes, and you're trying to do this, then maybe impact evaluations, you should think of an RCT. If there are none, you can think about different things, and these are the ones I'll be discussing in the appendix and trying to do it. So you have to do that. So first you have to design it, you have to control, then you have to think about internal validity, whether you pick the right comparison group. And if you think the result is valid for everyone, are they questions of external validity? Are they local versus global treatment effects? And all of these answers. So everything you do, you have to use your brain in order to argue. And there's no real answer, no unique answer at everything. Every time you have to think and question what you do in terms of that. Why is that? Because it's using statistical quote unquote crap is not a panacea, right? For thinking carefully. In the appendix, I show the various methods in Progressa, what is estimated, and you see what the different numbers are trying to do it, right? And we want to think about that. So impact evaluation is to estimate the causal impact of the outcomes of interest. We need to estimate the counterfactual. Counterfactual could be done using a randomized controlled trial, but could be done using different methods that are not randomized in nature, but uses characteristics of the programs that are different. So you see it, but you will use comparison or control groups. And you need to choose if you want to do this, you need to choose the best evaluation method in the context, operational context. And that operational context means money, means staff, it means requirements from the donor or the funder of your project. It needs time. You need to worry all about that before you try to do it. You cannot just do it after the fact. That's one of the things that needs to be done. And every time you're going to have to worry about that. So garbage in, garbage out. If you don't think about these things, this will go in. Right? So you need to think about internal validity issues, external validity issues. Right? We saw already from some of the sessions we've had, for instance, the session on social norms that we've had with Katie Fallon is a very good example why a study could be internally valid. It worked well for that village, but it's not externally valid because social norms are different according to this. So it could not be applicable, right? So we want to use that and want to argue that those results and trying to, so we want to use our brain here and trying to, the knowledge that we have in terms of that, right? So I'll stop for now and I'll take questions.
Great, thank you so much, Frank. I just want to maybe, while people start to think a little bit about their questions, remind those on Zoom that you can email me your questions. But just for now, I just want to make sure when Frank, you mentioned a few times the appendix, that is the appendix in your PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, that
correct?
will be down there.
Perfect. So everyone will be able to find a copy of these slides online. And I should mention that Frank has some very fantastic animations in his slides that we weren't able to show today. We're using a PDF version of the slides, but if you do go and download the slides later on our website, on the WED Lab website after this, you'll see all those fancy animations. Yeah, exactly. They're very intricate and beautiful. But there you'll find some slides that weren't shown so far now. There's, I think, maybe 10 or 20 slides that have accesses to references and different resources. So all of those can be found online. Are there any questions from anyone here in the room? Yes, please use your microphone and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ajay Bista. I work in Transport Canada, not too far from here. So my question is regarding the progress impact evaluation you conducted. Out of curiosity, like, had you done, I mean, an approach that I would validate is like, if you do before and after, and then go ahead and do the theory of change and contribution analysis, would that have been sufficient, or like, again, depending on fund and time, right? But would that be a good, would have that been a good approach, what do you think? Or
Thank you. The problem is we don't have time to vary in there, right? That we have, right? So what I mean by this is we could not say, like, let's visit these households now and wait 2 or 3 years and do it before and after. That's one thing, right? Okay. So that's why we're using at a given time,
okay,
at time T0, or the time where we are, right? We're using the fact that some households have been treated 5 years already, and we're comparing women that have not been treated yet, but have been selected eventually to be. So that's why we, quote unquote, cheating. Because initially what we would be doing is baseline, and then go at T0, look at the outcomes of both, look at T1, look at the outcomes of both, and then look at the difference of that, right? So that's why it's a quasi-experimental thing. Yeah. We do have a theory of change in the paper, and be happy to discuss that, and quite straightforward in terms of, what will be the potential attributes and advantages and disadvantages of microcredit to these women in terms of that. But we could not have the before and after because it was, again, after the fact. So that's why it's not it's not like an RCT, it's this, but it tries to do it. And basically the first thing it says is that clearly, if you're, so Nubble is a microcredit, it's also for profit microcredit is one of those things. And so the first thing that the study could say is that, well, it appears that whatever they do, they're doing it well. They know their client and they're going to go there and they're doing it, right? That's what you can see on that, right? But that's how limited that study could be. Then the question is, how do we expand these, and what are the lessons for women in general in these villages, and then whether the other villages could be used for reproducing this. These are questions that we can only think about, but we cannot answer directly with a yes or no. Got it.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Farwa. I'm from Oxfam, Canada, and thank you so much for your presentation. I had a question about external validity, and then, when you talk about like, for example, Nepal, right? So when you said that whatever results were there in that village wouldn't be applied to Canada, for example, but could they be applied to Nepal itself? Because population size could be the population of Nepal. And when you think about like applicability globally, there are very few things that would happen. So could you give also a good example of a study that has good external validity?
So let me answer the last question. Is there a good study out there? What do you mean by good? All right. So it exists that actually shows some of these things. In a way, you can never show it and demonstrate fully. Clearly, the Progressa one, when it was expanded to Oportunidades, the early results actually showed quite in line to what the pilot was, right? So if that's true, then maybe that's externally valid. Now, they tweaked the Oportunidades program, the eligibility criteria and everything else. So how much of this then becomes valid is a different question, right, in terms of that. Now, so that's the part. Now, to go back to our study from Nepal, as I was mentioning to the gentleman here, right, these are women who have been selected by the credit company. They're not like any woman in the village, all right? So if you're comparing these women, they're, for these women that are pre-selected, it does a good job. Why is it that they were selected? It was not random, right? So does this apply then? So then there's the issue of can you replicate this even in that village? And then is it an issue about whether then it applies to all women in Nepal? Of course, the answer is probably not. Right, so that's what I mean here, the externality, right? Now, external validity sometimes has to do with the individuals themselves, the way they're treated, but also external validity happens with the supply side, right? That is the type of company that works. For instance, Noble is a microcredit for profit. If you were to expand the credit program in Nepal, it means that Noble has to grow. It has to be bigger. Will they act the same way as a bigger company? Will they have the same type of managers? Will they have the same type of individuals? I don't know. But you could think, for instance, that it's not. They have people, they start hiring people that they don't operate the same way. They change their ways. So the results in our small survey might not be applicable, not because of the individual different from the woman's point of view, but from the fact that Noble changed their activity, right? So external validity has to do both with, sorry, I'm an economist, demand and supply stuff. Right.
Thank you for that question, both of you. Our last question for now comes from Ravendra Naidu. She's got a University of Alberta email address, so I assume that's where she's coming from. The question is, how do you handle crosstalk between treatment and control groups? For example, the treatment population may actually talk to and affect the behavior and beliefs of the control population. So how do you address that possibility?
Yeah. That's an excellent question. In RCTs or even elsewhere, that doesn't have to be randomized controlled trial, it's contamination, right? So if you randomize, for instance, at the individual level about a program like microcredit, so you go into a village and some people will get the microcredit program and some people will not. What happens to these women? They meet each other elsewhere. And then they might start discussing about how great and all the things that they learned from the microcredit, not only about the money, but they learn about how to be a better business person, and then they show up. That's called contamination. All right. So that's what it is. Sometimes it's good contamination. Sometimes it's not, right? So how do we do this? And that's part of this, what I was saying in my slide about which unit do you want to randomize and what do you need to worry about some of these things. So you have to do that. And if you go to the textbook that I just mentioned, it talks about some of these issues. And that's why when you want to do these things, you need expertise. You cannot start like this on the side. You need to talk to people who are doing some of that. I mean, perhaps AMITA people will know more and will let us know, or at DRC about how they do it, but they need to worry about some of these issues and how best they can avoid them. Otherwise, what will happen? The differences in the outcome will not be attributed only to the treatment, right? And it will not be internally valid. And if it's not internally valid, forget about external validity, right? So that's what's going to be the problem. So it's you need to worry about making sure that whatever you do it right. What did I say? Garbage in, garbage out.
Are there any attempts to address that issue?
Sorry, are we speaking to the microphone?
It
It captures it.
No, I was saying that are there any attempts?
Right, it's where you randomize, for instance.
Okay.
Right, so if you're doing a school project, so you go at one school and is the other school that's controlled, is it the school nearby or not? So you use distance maybe, try to segregate things. Right, so distance is one of the problems. If you use more distance, you might have a more problem in trying to see people that are alike. They're less alike than before. So it could be that the differences in individuals are not due to just the randomization, but it's due to the fact that they're farther away. So there are pros and cons in trying to measure.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for your.
But just to say, there's a lot of experience of these things in the references that I have in that long thing, right? Sonia Laszlo has a great paper on the review of some of these things, is trying to do it. So please go on the website, check it out. right? Well, the different types of studies that are done, and in there you can see about what they've done in terms of trying to isolate some of these issues and whether it worked or not. But if you're interested in that particular workings about how to set it up, the World Bank book is a great way to start.
Great, and I think a lot of these resources were in the suggested reading list that we sent out to anyone who registered online or in person, you know, not within the last 24 hours. It went out maybe about a day and a half ago, but if you didn't receive that email, all of the suggested readings will also be up on our website. Most of them are open access, all of them are hyperlinked, and they'll be in the kind of the related materials section once we post a recording of this seminar on our website. So with that, let's break for about 5 minutes. We'll come back here at around 1:56. All right, everyone, welcome back. I just want to share really quickly, we got one of the questions that came through my email was to ask where a link to this presentation can be found. So just so everyone knows, starting from a week from now, if you go to our website, which is women'sempowerment.lab.mcgill.ca, so that's women'sempowerment.lab.mcgill.ca. We have a whole tab with all of our seminars, past and upcoming, featured on there. And if you click on the title of this seminar, you will find the suggested reading list, the slides, recording of the video, all of that good stuff. So that's one of the questions that came through from someone watching online. Great. So without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists for today. Starting with Carl Asuncion, who is a monitoring and impact measurement expert specializing in quantitative data collection, management, analysis, and reporting systems. He's a senior project manager at MEDA and has supported 13 projects spanning 9 countries across Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean islands, Africa, and Eastern Europe during his tenure. Previously, Carl worked at the International Development Research Centre to support Canadian International Food Security Research Fund, Protégé QV, in Cameroon, to manage an urban agricultural project, and Asociación Calpa in Peru through the Atlantic Council for International Cooperation to implement a holistic health program. As well, we have with us here today Dr. Buba Husseini, who is a program officer for the International Development Research Centre's Employment and Growth Program that supports research and initiatives to expand employment and economic opportunities for women and youth. Prior to IDRC, he worked as a research officer at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative at Oxford University. Previously, he has taught development economics in undergraduate and graduate programs at Université Laval in Canada, and has worked as a consultant for various multilateral development agencies. Buba holds a PhD in economics from Laval and an MSc in statistics from Institut National de Statistique d'Économie Appliquée in Morocco. So please help me in welcoming both of our panelists. Great, and with that, I'll hand it over to Franck, who's going to moderate a discussion based on a list of questions that were circulated to our panelists in advance.
Thank you, Kate. So as I said before, this is great to have not only the opportunity to explain a little bit about impact evaluation, but particularly to try to think about how people in the field, whether NGOs or agencies, are trying to do about these things. And so the first question I asked our panel members to actually look is answer the following one, which you can see on the screen, is what type of empirical analysis and results do you support do you use to support your programming and funding research? So it's overall, what are you doing? All right. And because it's, you know, there are several things that one can do. And among the various sorts of methods, do you also consider impact evaluation? Right. So do you get results that are measured using impact evaluation methods? So you measure results by taking into account counterfactuals. Where one could do this, for instance, IEEmpact.org is an international initiative for impact evaluation. It is a website that has all that information. They're trying to do it about all the studies that are done, both quantitative and qualitative, and how it works or not, those that are impact evaluation, those that are not, those that are RCT, and so on and so forth. This is the source of that. So one of the questions, do you use that for your program? And that's for Carl at MEDA or at Buba, who's at RDRC. So I'll start with Carl, see if he can enlighten us with how people do it in real life.
Thanks, Frank, and I'm happy to be here. I'd say that at META, most of our analysis is descriptive in nature, which means we'll start out by establishing sort of some KPIs, key performance indicators, and then we'll kind of monitor those throughout the project. We have a core set of indicators at META that span income, assets, and business capacity. That's at the core of META. We are kind of business-minded as an organization, but more and more, we are making sure that we include indicators that connect to our gender equality framework that spans kind of 3 domains: access and use, agency and rights, as well as a gender just enabling environment. And so there'll be different indicators that span those. For example, in access and use, we'll make sure that women have same opportunities of employment as men, assets like land for economic advancement, as well as more and more kind of that resilience to climate change and environmental shocks. So we're also including those. And so we have indicators that speak to those 3 different domains. I'll also say that more and more at META, we're connecting with our clients during the development of these indicators and letting them define what they see as a pathway for their own kind of progress. To give an example, I'm trying to throw as many examples as I can today. We use this one approach that we call gender progress markers, developed from CARE. And so we're meeting with different clients in different countries and letting them define what is an empowered woman, what is a male champion, and letting them set out what they expect, like, and would love to see from the project that we are working in there with. And in that way, we really feel it's going to help us, and it's already helping us conduct this intersectional analysis, which even the indicators themselves are gathered from these conversations with the different client groups. As an example of what a different indicator might mean, we'll have household chores, for example. So sharing of those household kind of activities. I expect to see it might be men help out with household chores when they're asked. A like to see level would be when I, as a woman, small entrepreneur, am out in the field tending for my farm. My husband is helping with those household activities, and at the love to see level, it would be that whether I'm home or not, my husband is helping me with those household chores. And many more examples about that. What's beautiful about this approach, about including the women or our clients in these conversations, is even in the same country, we're working in different locations, geographic locations. And so one group might define empowerment more as success of their businesses, whereas another group might define empowered more about being able to speak their truth at the household level. And so those indicators then make it into our analysis, and we let the women define then kind of what path they're walking. As part of our analysis as well, we don't just stop at collecting and analyzing the data. We actually go back to these communities, and we have these kind of validation workshops with our clients as well. And we really like these kind of last 2 components of our analysis approach, because it includes the women, and it allows us to go from a conversation that is often kind of quantitative in nature to collect some of those qualitative components like Frank already mentioned. And the other component that I'm appreciating more and more coming from economics as well is that trust component. And so I said at the beginning of my time at META, I was, and I still am, a big proponent of random sampling, but some of these women's economic empowerment indicators really require implementers to build trust, build relationships with the people from which we're collecting data. Some of this data is incredibly sensitive in nature. And if I go as a man, try to collect this data from a woman client, how are they expected to respond honestly to me and to a man, yet alone a foreigner male? So more and more kind of realizing the importance of that. To speak to the impact evaluation component, me doesn't really engage in that space. We find it quite difficult to find a control group. However, what we're doing is we have this kind of rolling baseline methodology or a phase and study methodology where we will establish cohorts for different time periods. So for example, January 1st, 2018 to end of the year, December 2018 might be cohort 1, and cohort 2 might be January 1st, 2019, all the way to December 2019 this year. And as a result of having these cohorts and never ending our registration to a project, we're able to compare clients between different cohorts, the same cohorts to each other, and then to kind of speak to what you were talking about, Frank, we have the opportunity to compare the baseline of cohort number 2 with the annual survey or follow-up survey results of cohort number 1, and so on and so forth. So perhaps I'll end there for now, hoping to engage in a discussion about what the rest of the group thinks about this.
Okay. Thank you. Let's go to Buba now, and then we'll go back on these questions.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Kate, for bringing me in this conversation. I think what I will do, I will touch on 3 things. One is on what research we do or we support at IGRC that has to do with quantitative research on women empowerment. And the second is on how, meaning what methods that we use in this work or research. And then third is on the modalities. And I think this has a bit also to do on how we program. And so on the what, for the what and the how, I will mostly build on our GROW program. GROW is a 5-year program that IGRC completed last year. It's a multi-funder partnership between DFID and ULED Foundation. That was a set of 14 projects, and the projects are all on women economic empowerment or on producing evidence to inform social and economic policies that improve poor women's lives while promoting also at the same time economic growth. And this is also why I want to say all what I'm saying here is really about women economic empowerment, because at IGRC there are many other works that are being done on women empowerment, but not necessarily the economic aspect of it. So on GROW program, for example, thematically, GROW cover 4 thematic areas. One is on measurement of women economic empowerment. This is more about like welfare economics or statistics on how actually when you speak about women economic empowerment, how do you measure it? And there is a very good paper led by Sonia here that document what are the different measures of women economic empowerment that were used in quantitative research. I'm sure that if you go on the website, you'll find the paper. The second area that GROW cover is on macroeconomics and gender. This is quite new also because traditionally macroeconomic analysis was really gender blend. And as you all know, everything started with macro first because this is where all the macro planning happening. And then it goes from top to down until micro intervention. So it's very important if we really trying to achieve result at scale, to also bring that conversation at macro level. And this is why one of the areas that GROW try to cover is on how you integrate gender issues in macroeconomic policies and macro planning. So it touched, for example, on things like the impact of trade policies on women economic empowerment, or what is the effect of increased economic growth on women economic empowerment and vice versa, or an increased empowerment of women, how does that impact the economy? So, and the third area that GROW cover is on the women double burden and the care economy. So basically, this is where we try also to show, for example, women as an agent, an economic agent, they have different realities and they face different constraints as compared to women. And one of the biggest one is all the things that they have to take care in terms of unpaid work and unpaid care. First is we try to show how these affect their participation, for example, in the economy, and what are successful or effective intervention and programs that can really release this burden on them. And the fourth area was on constraint to, it's like women, female labor force participation, and what are the different other contexts in addition to the unpaid care that I mentioned in their participation in the labor market. This is where we also show things like labor market segregation and trends in women participation in Asia versus in Africa in different contexts. So, and then this is the what, and on the how to respond on the method part is very varied and mixed approach from that came from GROW project. The first one was, as I said, on the measurement. This is very straightforward on, okay, try to document how the women economic empowerment should be measured. A second approach that was used is impact evaluation, of course, and there were a lot of papers or projects on RCTs and other impact evaluation methods also, like difference and difference or matching and so on. And there were also a few papers on cross-country analysis and regression also. So more like macro regressions. And there were also a very big area of growth that does systematic reviews, which is also another quantitative way of doing research. So instead of necessarily producing new knowledge, there are already a lot of fragmented knowledge that exists. How you bring them all together to really say what is happening. So as you can see, what our work on women economic empowerment is really very diverse, both in terms of what we're working on, but also in terms of the methods that we use. And of course, if we're talking here about a program and over a long period of time, it's always possible to do this to have this kind of diversity. But now, and this is where I think we need to have, like, to be inclusive also in our approach of doing things. So the way I see really research for development is that there is no one single approach that can solve all the problem. So we need to have like a more comprehensive approach where we also recognize and value the contribution of each of these different pieces. And then now it depends on at what level we can intervene. Because for a macro planner, for example, he needs to have all of these pieces. But then when you're dealing maybe for a micro planner, for example, an NGO that need to operate in a specific areas, probably they will not need all of this, but they need part of it. But I think I can come back later on my view of these different methods and what we're observing in terms of trend in empirical research, and from IDRC perspective also where we want to go in the next little while.
All right, thank you very much. These are both great discussions. So we're going to take your questions, your answers, sorry, to my first question, and we're going to lead into our second question. So what would you need in your operations to integrate some of the approaches that would look at results compared to a counterfactual? All right, so for instance, Carl, you already talked, you have these different cohorts now you're trying to look at. So that sounds like to me, you're trying to find, what not only monitor, but also evaluate and maybe impact evaluation, right? So there's an approach, and what does it mean by an approach here? I mean, you need terms of references from, you're talking about your clients, but also clearly you also have funders for your things. Perhaps the funders are asking you to evaluate more. Same thing with IDRC. There are questions. So do you need more budget? Do you need more expertise? You need some more requirements by the funder to try to do it? Are there pressures, say, from Global Affairs Canada? As we all know, there are all these trends out there about how development takes place, and everything else, right? And I have no doubt that the fact that Esther Duflo Banerjee and Kremer got a Nobel Prize might influence some people in the policy office of the minister and say, oh, how come we're not doing these things? And then this will go to the president's office or the deputy minister's office, and then it will go down all to the bureaucrats and saying, well, why are we doing it, or do we not doing it? And there's this, right? So, which eventually go down to the project level and say, oh, we should do effective validation. So do you expect this happen or not? And if so, what do you think one should do about it, and how are you going to go about it? So that's my second round of question. Carl, do you want to go?
I think that for META, I think money is always kind of useful. But I think the more important part for us, I think, is expertise to analyze this data routinely, especially at the field level. I think that with more money, META would maybe pilot more impact evaluation type work. But then we probably do our own investigation about how efficient it was, how cost effective it was. I still think that there's a lot we can learn from our commitment to phase and study approaches. I still am not sure that we are leveraging all that data as well as we could for various reasons. I think one of the areas at META where we are improving right now, I think it's going to help us, is we're trying to kind of knock out the quantitative data analysis as quick as possible by establishing data sets and like systems like Power BI that are pulling from a data set that we are refreshing, so we can get kind of a right time or data analysis whenever we ask for it, which opens up that space to maybe do some more research components. But I still think that there's a lot that we can improve on to complete those administrative components for funders and whatnot efficiently. But I feel like that's what we need to improve on first.
If I may ask, do you also pool resources with the other NGOs, like with CARE or with Oxfam? Or?
At this time, no. I do think that, especially organizations working together on the ground, if they were to collaborate, learn from each other, that would really help. I will say that we're trying to leverage expertise at different organizations. So for an inception mission that happened pretty recently at META in Senegal, we collaborate with organization, and META kind of led on the market systems gendered analysis of the value chain, and then work with them to do gender analysis of the, of the gender realities on the ground. So we are trying to work in that way to, be more cost efficient with what money we do have.
Maybe to respond to that question, I'm gonna start by explaining very quickly what IGRC is, and then second also on how we do research programming. So IGRC, as many of you or most of you know, we are a research for development funder. So we don't evaluate, of course we evaluate our projects also to make sure that they are aligned with our mandate and mission, but we don't evaluate them from an impact evaluation or RCT point of view to show the impact of an intervention, because they are not intervention, they are projects. But where the RCT or impact evaluation comes in is in, as I said earlier, is in the different methods that we use in our different research, or that our grantees or partners use in their different research projects. Now, as a research for development funder, I think I'm gonna explain very quickly also our evaluation framework, which is the evaluation, how do we evaluate the research or the work that we do, or how do we evaluate when we receive a research proposal, what are the things that really we care about, we want to see, because, and I think this is very much aligned of what you're asking in terms of where we're going, given the recent development and all of that. So we recently put in a paper or developed something that we call the Research Quality Plus Framework. And this is a framework that tries to say that the way research quality is traditionally measured is not enough, because the way it measures so far is really exclusively based on, if I can say, research integrity or the quality from an academic point of view. Of course, this is a very critical aspect of it. But when you're doing research for development, you need also to go beyond the quality standard that we have in the academic field. And this is what the research quality framework is doing. So what is that framework is saying that you need to have a multidimensional approach to research quality assessment. And we identify 4 dimensions. One is the research integrity, or to make it quick, some of the elements that we already know on what a good research, how can it be published in top, for example, academic journal, what is the technical quality, the appropriateness, the rigors. And then the second element or dimension is the importance of that research. And these 2 first dimensions are all things that we already know in the academic field, because also you cannot research on something that is not important, because research is about really trying to produce new knowledge that can be used to change life of people. So there is this importance of research. And the third dimension and fourth, these are the dimensions that are traditionally or exclude or not taken care very well. This is, the third one is the research legitimacy. What we call research legitimacy here is how do you address, for example, negative consequences of research? Because you can sit in a lab or you run intervention and things on the ground, you get very critical, interesting result, but you also need to care. And I think Frank also touched on that earlier on how are you affecting the people you researching on. The second is both in the research process and also the kind of things that you search on. You need to get some gender, to have gender responsive approaches. And this is also something we care a lot at IGRC, and be more inclusive in general to make sure that everyone is comfortable with the approach, with the questions, the methodologies, the findings, the way they are shared, and so on. And third, another element that has to do with research integrity, and this is very specific to IGRC also, is how do you engage with local knowledge? Because I think one of the very big issue we sometimes have, and especially with this is part of some of the critiques that we have on impact evaluation or random or RCT in general, there is this more like external intervention coming in with some paternalistic way of doing things. So we have the ultimate knowledge, we know how to do things, we have the money, we go, we run intervention, we run experiences, we take the data, we go back to where we come from, we analyze, we publish in journal where there is some disconnection between all of those publications and what is happening to people on the ground. In IGRC, this is not our way of doing things. We always try to make sure that the research we do it jointly with local researchers, and so that we can also leverage local knowledge, and that throughout the whole process also there is a co-creation of knowledge, and is going to ensure that that knowledge will be used to impact the life of those people. And the last dimension in our research quality framework is the positioning for use, which means that also in this kind of, in our work, we always care, we want to see how all the knowledge and the evidence that are being produced are uptake or are used by policy makers. And we ran some evaluation on our projects the last few years, and I want to share very quickly with you also some of the drivers of quality plus research that we observe. There are 4 factors that we found are driving the quality plus research, or are really aligned with these 4 dimensions of research quality plus that I mentioned. One is most of the projects that really did very well on these 4 dimensions of research quality plus framework, they use mixed method approach. So they are not just quantitative projects, or they are not just qualitative. They don't just do I don't know, cross-country regression or RCT, they tend to mix at the same time primary and secondary research. They tend to mix qualitative and quantitative. So there is some really a good combination of different way of doing things. And because it's when you do that, that you are sure that you really get something very meaningful for everyone, and that you can draw also, as you said, Frank, when you run, for example, an RCT, the RCT tell you what is the impact of the intervention, but why you having that impact, you need also to talk to people, to different people, so that you can document your result and you see how you can take them from where forward. The second factors was it takes a research quality plus research takes a continuous engagement with key influencers. And more in our work in IDRC now, we try really to have very mixed research team, where it's not just academic research, but they also include, for example, policymakers as co-PI, or practitioners from the private sectors, from NGOs as co-PIs, so that you have that very continuous engagement with them from the beginning till the end, and make sure that what you produce is good. And the third drivers is a bit related to the second one, is the need to really mix also research and practice, so that you produce apply and practical research. And then the fourth and last one has to do with engagement of local knowledge that I mentioned earlier, which is how do you bring in local or different contexts and local contexts in what you are doing. So this is more or less how we approach research, and how quantitative methods or RCTs come in within that broader framework.
Thanks, Uwe. That's very interesting. I'm sure we'll have more questions as we go. So I have my last question in terms of that now is, according to what you just said in your answers, the first and the second questions, right? In which directions would you like to see researchers, people in the field, policy analysts, and funders, whether it's IDRC, well, you've already given us the lead of where you want to go, but like Global Affairs Canada, the World Bank, the Gates Foundation, whatever you want, to address how one can learn together, right? So that we can assess what works better, not only in terms of like replicating the activities, like you worked for your project, it'll work elsewhere in the country or everything else, but also to expand them, all right? So how do we know to find out what works and what can we do, right? Because you seem to have that a lot of knowledge out there, but this is great. You're telling us this, but I knew you were doing great work, but I just didn't know you were doing all of these things, right? So it seems to me that there are advantages here where we could learn from you, like I as an academic can learn from what Meta does, but I'm sure Oxfam could learn something, and you could learn from Oxfam or CARE or all the other NGOs, right? So what are there steps we could do about this, or we just go back to our offices, respective offices, and do nothing?
I definitely hope we'll do something. I think that, this panel here, a lot of economists are right now sitting at this panel, and I feel the first step is to really kind of build that empathy component. It took me quite a while, and definitely through my work at Meta, to understand the importance of that. And so sensitive data collection approaches, I think, are actually going to yield or help everyone get better data than they even think that they can get right now. And I think that component of the trust I spoke about earlier is still something that we're exploring how to do properly. We got to understand that there's limits to the random sampling, but you also need that in order to tell the story for your entire kind of project population. With all that data, I'm hoping that people will also act, fill gaps that either Meta or other organizations have, help each other out. At Meta, by working more closely between the monitoring impact management team with gender equality specialists, really trying to push the boundary of what is an intersectional analysis. How can we communicate that in the project, in the organization, like effectively in a meaningful way? We're talking about triangulation at length, so I'll kind of walk over that. And then I also kind of already spoke about collaboration. There's just so much kind of local knowledge, people working on the ground, the people that we hire on the ground, they know so much, and we're continuously learning from them So we need to allow them the space to teach us as well. And I'll end for the people in the field, kind of part of this, with the importance of socializing and mainstreaming like gender across organizations. And so at MEDA, I've already spoken a little bit about how I come from the monitor impact measurement space, more quantitative, but in our team, we're working really closely with the gender equality team. And that's led to some really interesting changes in the organization. I spoke about intersectional analysis, but we're also building this gender equality indicator bank. It's a bunch of indicators that are connected to our gender equality framework that have been vetted by gender equality specialists. And so always have at our fingertips approved indicators that really speak to women's economic empowerment. We also have the standard gender equality strategy and reporting templates. And another one is that I'm personally incredibly involved in is this gender equality and development series. We're actually working through seminal articles with feminist theories, and that's really pushing out this knowledge that may have sometimes just been contained to gender equality specialists and pushing it out to other M&E colleagues, project managers, the technical directors, and that's really creating this this space for everyone to really get much better acquainted with what it is that we're talking about when we talk about agency and power. These are terms that you hear a lot when you enter development organizations, but maybe only a select few people truly understand what that means and how elaborate that really gets. And just in discussions, even though we may not get to a whole bunch of answers all the time during these conversations, just the fact that everybody's thinking about them is really helping. For funders, I think an understanding about the time it takes for women's economic empowerment to actually take place is incredibly important. But in templates that they develop for reporting semi-annually, annually, if they make it explicit what type of analysis they are expecting, I think it would force organizations like MEDA to allocate resources to that type of analysis when push comes to shove. So I spoke a little bit about the administrative component of meeting or reporting on our PMF indicators for Global First Canada project, for example. If they integrate into these reporting guidelines most explicitly like what they're looking for from MEDA, I think then we would have no more of an excuse to not devote as much resources to that as possible. But I do think that the working that we have right now with M&E and gender equality and environment is already helping with that. And so we're trying to kind of mainstream that throughout the entire reporting template. And for researchers, we've already spoke about the importance of collaboration. I think there's a lot of data that we collect. We don't even know, I think, some of the possibilities that we have with our data. I would love for researchers to dig into it. Sometimes when we're doing the day-to-day monitoring work, we kind of lose track about the opportunities that we have with all of our data. And like I already mentioned, we're already, I think, doing a pretty good job triangulating with qualitative approaches. But to comment on what you said, I think it's important for researchers not just work with other researchers, but also with implementers like MEDA. We work in a very different place. And I think it could lead to really kind of, I don't use the word relevant, but findings that we could work on right away. And so even our current clients can benefit for some of the lessons that we learned. Perhaps I'll end there.
Thank you, Buba. Do you want to answer that? And then I have several questions after we can.
I'm not sure it was a question, but I think I'm going to answer to your question. So I know just in terms of where we're going and the perspective, again, going back to our GROW program, the 4 areas that I mentioned there at the end of the program, they were like research gaps and future direction identified. I'll share very quickly, for example, on the measurement, when we find that there are, Sonia, I can't remember how many measures we have for women economic empowerment. So in terms of next step, what would be good is to see which to do a bit a deeper analysis to understand really what would be the appropriate measure and how usable they are and how they can be also mainstream at country level to monitor progress. This is something I personally would like to see. For example, we all know how we measure poverty, how we measure growth, and now women economic empowerment is something very important and commonly understood now. So are we able also to develop a unique good measure that can be implemented using existing data, for example, or by just doing some addition or revision at existing data, and we'll be able to do that and monitor. This is an area of work. The second, on the macro and gender, for example, there are discussion and interest into doing some research to understand, to develop or to develop gender responsive fiscal policies, for example. How can we make the fiscal policies gender sensitive? Because this is at macro, another macro work, for example, in doing country growth diagnostic, how can you integrate elements like gender? Because the way growth is analyzed is gender blind. If you're able to also segment it with variable like gender, this is another area in the care economy. It's just the field is very fresh. We know already what are, based on few research, what are the interventions that can have win-win result. How can we make that, get a significant stock of knowledge on that? On the labor market segregation, for example, we want to deep also more to understand what are the drivers of segregation and how do you address them. And all of these are not really theoretical thinking. And in fact, if I can share in a scoop with you, we're already thinking about a Grow 2, and we hope that very soon we'll launch it. And then I know that there are two other emerging issues also that I think are very difficult. One of them is very difficult to address in quantitative research, is how do you integrate social norms? Because we all know that gender issues are really social norms issues. Economists knows that also, but they don't work a lot or think a lot about that because it's very difficult to integrate in economic research. But I think this is a direction where if we're able to make some contribution, maybe we'll be the successor of Flow and yeah. And then and the second area is some work on understanding also the impact of investment in infrastructure on women economic empowerment. And in infrastructure, I'm putting here all transportation, unpaid care, or how to release the burden of unpaid care, public procurement. There are different things that can be done to improve women access to economy and all of that, but we don't know much really what are the impact of those possibilities and how these the mechanism, how it can be implemented. I think I'm gonna stop here.
Here we go. No, this is great. So thanks for the scoop also. That's good. But what I want to point out in that question, re-emphasize, right, is this is great. You're thinking of all of these things in terms of the new things you want to think. But I think one thing that gets out of this panel is that there's a lot of knowledge out there from META, from CARE, from Oxfam and all this, that it's within these NGOs, all right, about all their experiences of working in the past and now. It's quote unquote unused.
Sorry.
It's unused, all right? I mean, first of all, they don't seem to be talking a lot to each other in a formal way, maybe in an informal way, right? They don't talk to academics. I mean, I'd like to talk more to them. I've got PhD students or master students who love to work with the data and everything else, right? So what do we need to have a receptacle of all that knowledge, trying to train people and do more, all right? So, one could think that maybe as part of Grow 2 or as part of some request by Global Affairs Canada or the Gates Foundation or something, that they should be saying, look, you guys doing all these works, you should learn from each other and not only learn in implementers, but also looking at a research and practice and how practice then will influence research, right? So this is something that could be done here within Canada, Canadian-based, and so on and so forth. Sorry, I'm just, getting excited here and trying to do it. But this is clearly something that it seemed to me that we all have all the experience, and we can share that, and we can all learn from both of the implementers. Can learn from each other. We can learn from them. Policy world can learn from them. We can then help to try to devise better policy. We can then measure better the impacts or what is our policies, so that eventually there's a report that's given to Parliament about all the great work that the government of Canada has been doing elsewhere, so on and so forth. Maybe I'm getting excited, but the point is that it is possible to try to think about this, and I would hope that maybe IDRC or some other things would be an occasion to try to formulate something special where all that information, let's use it together, right? So, but I think we should end here, and then maybe go to questions here from the floor.
Yes, I agree. Let's take to the floor. I saw one hand up here to start, so just introduce yourself first. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Erin. I work here at IDRC as a research awardee with the Employment and Growth team. I had a question Buba mentioned, but I'd like to hear from the rest of you as well. When we're talking about collaboration and learning from each other, especially in terms of sort of the research that's done on the ground, there is a concern about extractive research models, and so we're trying to leverage local knowledge and everything, but I imagine community members and local researchers may also want to know, is this stuff working, the same kinds of things we want to get from impact evaluations. So I was just wondering, do you have a reflection on how to do impact evaluations that's relevant and meaningful for local researchers, as well as community members on the ground?
The GROW projects that I've been part of, they were locally based first, right? The people from Kenya worked on them. People from Tanzania worked on them. We were asked to support them. So there was some illusion out there about these evil Western economists going and imposing their beliefs on the ground. Maybe that's true in some cases, but for the two projects we've done, all right, it was locally done, right? So does that answer your question?
Not exactly. I'm asking, even when we're doing research that is starting, addressing local concerns and everything, I think there may also be local interest in knowing how well it's going, like how well.
Yeah, but that's why it was locally done, and the stakeholders were done at a local level, and there was a follow-up before, there was a follow-up after, and the research was really done jointly, but mostly by the local people.
I guess
so. That's why in that respect, I don't. For my project, right now, I'm not sure how that question, which I'm sure has happened in the past, but not from what I did.
I guess you feel that then the RCT methodology or other types of impact evaluation is effective in answering those questions on the local level.
I don't know whether it was effective or not to answer these questions, but it was what the local people wanted to do.
Sonia is offering some help,
right?
I was just wondering if I could just jump in here. From my own experience, projects that I've been involved in, they've worked best when I've been able to work with local collaborators. And what that means is local researchers engaging with local stakeholders, engaging with policymakers, and talking to people on the ground. This stuff might not necessarily turn up in a paper that's, you might not see it in a paper that ends up getting published, in my case, in an economics journal, but it's happening, right? I think, and I think that the discipline is changing in this direction. And this is true for RCT and non-RCT, that they're increasingly work in development is co-authored, co-produced. You use the co-design, I think, right, term. A lot of research is increasingly, and I think IDRC, at least in Canada, is a major player here in encouraging these sorts of connections to be made between researchers, local researchers in developing countries with researchers here. It's, it just, that's good research in my mind. If you're going to work in, I work a lot in Peru. I work a lot with Peruvian researchers. I talk to Peruvian policymakers, and that's just what makes, I think, good research. I don't know if that answers your question a little bit, but I think increasingly we are going in that direction. We have been going in that direction for the last 20 years, I think.
I think some of us were doing it before that. Some of us are old enough to have done it before that.
Did anyone else on the panel want to respond to that before we head to the next question?
No, I just want to clarify, are you talking about validation of the research, or are you talking about who is validating that the research that is produced?
Yeah, and is the method of validation of seeing how well this is working, is that lining up with what sort of community members and your local research partners are interested in exactly? Like, is that answering their questions in the way that they're phrasing them, I guess?
Well, I think just maybe what I can say is a continuous process, because if you see where we come from very far, and now I think more and more we're saying that it's not enough just to write very, good technical papers, publish them in top journals, but you need to do more. So there is this conversation, and I think ultimately what we would want to see is one day that some of those top journals are also based in the South, because this is where that is gonna be like the ultimate like an end. Because if this happens, it's gonna show that, okay, finally the quality or the validation of research is not just happening there, but it's also happening here. But in the interim period, the only thing we can do is, are we producing things that are relevant for local people? Second, are we engaging them also in getting them involved in that research and so on?
Yeah. My point is that they engaged us. That's what they wanted to do.
Well,
right.
Yeah.
So on that respect, right? So it's.
I was talking about
that, but I think the other issue is, I think it's, is it used, locally speaking, by the policy people? And for the 2 GROW projects we went to countless meetings with the government, all right? And there was the local researchers communicating with them. Right. Now, whether Mr. Magufuli of Tanzania is using the results to do something, that's a different kettle of fish. But let's not go there. Carl.
Okay, Carl, did you want to respond to that?
I think Aaron, correct? I think Aaron's question is more focused around research, but I'd say from a media perspective, all the activities that we do with partners, we try to make sure that we add value to be our small medium enterprise partner, research partner, try to make sure that what we do adds value to them. And, we'll conduct these assessments with a partner. And so we hope that our findings can inform some of their policies, some of their practices. And we have much new to add to what they've already said.
Great. I saw another hand coming up. Yes. Introduce yourself. I know you, but others may not.
Others may not. Hi, my name is Anna. I'm a project officer on MEL in Oxfam here in Ottawa, but my question also connects back to my experience with Save the Children, give or take a year ago. So from 2 different hats. I just want to reflect actually on your question 3. And I think one of the inputs I would give to that is that about a year or so ago, there was a number of large projects across a few organizations, META being one of them, CARE, Save the Children, this was pre my Oxfam Lives, that were all wrapping up under MasterCard Foundation. And there was a series, and MasterCard is at that point at least known for funding, having bigger research budgets and learning budgets than maybe other donors may. They've also changed strategies, so don't quote me on their new strategy. But at that point in time, all these projects were wrapping up, and there was these series of learning events, and there was this real opportunity, I feel like, for people across the city to see and meet each other and talk about projects that had a lot of common elements. But unfortunately, I don't know if you would agree or disagree with this after, hadn't really been fully engaged with each other throughout their 5 to 6 year lifespans at that point, and then they were in this last moment of learning and this last moment of, oh wait, now we're all seeing and we're understanding. I remember being in a room with the care team and really crossing over our experiences in a way that was useful then, but would have been more useful like 2 years prior. So and I feel even now working on a violence against women project, I'm not actually fully linked or aware of the other projects around the city that are doing similar work in different organizations. And so I'm kind of replicating the same pattern. And so what I would tell or suggest, and part of that is up to us to make those links, but part of it is also up to the funders to kind of allocate the time and space, us to allocate them to approve. It's a mixed up combination. But why are those opportunities only existing at the end of projects, if they at all do? Not even all projects have opportunities for learning like that. And this recognition that learning isn't just the end product, learning is a process. So I think we as organizations and implementers and researchers and academics need to do a better job of carving out that time and understanding who our like-minded projects are. But then also, why are we just writing this in at the end of projects? Why is learning the end goal instead of the process? And that's how it felt like, oh, this was a great moment. There was so much being shared for a few months because everyone was wrapping up this great work they'd done for 5 or 6 years, but why had we never even had those links between each other beforehand?
So
it's more like a reflection, not really a question.
Yes, but based on that
felt
reflection,
like how it was, what was happening.
so based on that reflection, what would you see? What would you like to see so that it's not at the end, people discuss with each other?
Yeah.
So what would you see having as a?
I mean, practically, it shouldn't necessarily be only up to the organizations to sleuth out every matching similar-ish project out there. I think that like the officers at GAC could do a better job of connecting us. That's a real step one. They know what their like-minded, the like projects are across, and or at IDRC or whichever our funders are. We, yes, can do a better job of reaching out, but I think there's a two-way path there. And also I think when we're building in, even in project design and then in project approvals and development, that for especially, I mean, most of my experience is in multi-year projects. So note in my answer here. Why can we not like design like a midway point learning event, a moment? They don't all have to be big, huge events, small events, time periods for people to get together across organizations, across projects, and really reflect on what's happening without having a big final research project, without having all the data. Because there's a process, there's a moment there where you can, there's all those course corrections and adjustments that you can make, especially when you learn from people outside of your own organization, your own project. So I think we can build that in. It can be, I do think there's a two-way relationship between organizations and the funders there, where both sides likely have a strong role. When we did our own final learning event last year, we did try to reach out to academia and researchers and got some very lukewarm responses in the end. So I think it was strange, like, but maybe that's because they hadn't been engaged earlier on either. So there's a bit of this last moment situation that doesn't capitalize on what could be happening together. That's a lot of reflection, not really a question. Sorry for eating up time.
Yes, we have one more question from in the room, and then I'll take it to a couple of online questions, but please go ahead, introduce yourself.
I work at Global Affairs Canada, and I'm working on women's economic empowerment. And the reason I raise my hand right now is because I know there is a community of practice that we have been having with NGOs. It is difficult and it's wonderful to coordinate amongst ourselves as well, who is working on what and what projects are there. And at this moment, actually, we're looking into what is the purpose of this community of practice. It looks like attendance has gone down a bit on all sides. So it's something interesting perhaps to connect and see and explore what can be done, because since we asked that third question, our panelists have been thinking about how we can actually do more on exchanging and on being innovative. Either that will be having set types of models that apply in certain situations, or having one approach that would work at the micro level, or something that will work. This morning we met with colleagues from Germany in Pretoria on video conference, and we mentioned the word innovation and experimentation, and they said, well, we have already passed from experimentation and now we are into navigation, which to me was like, wow, what a great thing to be able to say if you feel that confident that you have done so many you have applied so much science into your projects, like maybe I'm not sure if they engaged in impact evaluations, but they are now comfortable to say that at the macro level they can apply pretty good strategies. So now that we're having a government which is going to expect of us to propose much better business cases for our projects, we will be looking into efficient ways, and impact evaluations will probably not be more widely used to assess and to give us good feedback on what works and what doesn't, but probably elaborate a little more and try to push a little more that issue of how to be innovative, what can we perhaps do upfront at the program design stage, so that we design a robust program that will give us some information about the impact of the program without the full-blown impact evaluation.
Okay. Any initial responses to anything that's been discussed so far from the panel? Frank?
I just want to say, just talking to each other and working with each other, both from the research and the implementers, that's innovation. Just so we understand, right? It's innovation. That already would be innovative enough in trying to do it, right? And then put all that information growing from all the experience that you were describing, Anna, right? That's, I mean, I know we're all just using keywords now. Sometimes innovation is one of them, but certainly it is, right? We're trying to do it. So, but certainly I think there's a lot that one could be done, perhaps requiring not too much, but someone has to be a prime mover, and usually it's RDRC, or a funder like Global Affairs or the Gates Foundation or something that comes in that tries to centralize, right? That. So I'm just offering the possibility that perhaps this should be done.
I had to go back to Anna's kind of reflection there. I know this was quite a question. At MEDA, we're really trying to use monitoring as an opportunity to learn some of monitoring activities. And one of the ways that we're doing it is because there's so many assumptions in our projects, we're taking this kind of hypothesis testing approach where we'll figure out, so we'll put out the question, if we make this e-course available to the client group, will women engage in it? Or we'll try and figure out like how are women actually using their cell phones? Do they use them for kind of personal items or for business? And so we're always kind of trying to review our assumptions in that way. There was one project that, I'm not switching examples, there was one project that I am still a part of where all of the projects under that kind of program were brought together for like a 3-day meeting. And we discussed what was expected of the different projects and how these different projects are different and the same. And the funder made it very clear about how they were looking for these different projects to complement each other. We haven't had a kind of meeting together since. It's been, I guess, about 1.5 years now. But I do think that that was a fantastic way to kick us off. It also kind of broke down this barrier that you can connect openly whenever you want about this project. That's actually expectation that the funder had of the organizations involved in that kind of portfolio. And so from the get-go, you can talk to another one about, like, are you having this challenge as well? We're that a collection approach. What are you learning? And I believe that the plan is for this midterm meeting to actually meet in one of the countries that the project is working in. And so I think that's a fantastic way to do things. And to comment on what Anna said, I do think it starts with the funder. And I believe that this funder actually, even from not the project budget, but from their budget, brought everyone to the same place for these conversations. And so they didn't have, the different organizations didn't have to worry about the paying for travel to have these meetings.
Great. All right, we are unfortunately out of time. There was a few questions online that we didn't get to. I apologize for that. There may have been some in the room as well. I just want to, here's the link. People were asking for it. I even got a couple more people online asking for it again. If you were registered for the webinar, then you'll get a thank you email tomorrow, which will have this link in it as well to our website. Just want to, before we go, give a great thanks to Frank, first of all, for facilitating. It was, I think, a really fantastic discussion. I learned a lot personally. I think it was really terrific, so thank you for that. As well as to Carl and Buba for your time and your thoughts and your reflections today. I think it's just been such a fantastic treat through this seminar series to bring together people working on practice and academia and in policy and from all these different positionalities to talk about these issues. And I think the conversation today was very rich, so thank you very much. As well to our partners at IDRC. This is a partnership at the WED Lab Seminar Series between the Institute for the Study of International Development at McGill and IDRC. And thanks also to the generous support from the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. That's it. Thank you all for our next seminar series, we have two more coming up. One's on women in conflict, which has yet to be scheduled, and then another is on women's employment and entrepreneurship in the transition to the low carbon economy. A bit of a mouthful, but that's it. And that will be taking place on December 11th. All of the information about upcoming seminars can also be found on our website. So thank you, everyone.